On a quiet September evening in 1980, in the small town of Bismarck, North Dakota, a young woman vanished without a trace. Her name was Debora Sue Schatz, a 23-year-old with a radiant smile, a gentle soul, and dreams that never had the chance to be fulfilled. What happened to her would shake the town and leave a haunting mystery of cruelty and betrayal. Her disappearance seemed at first like one of those tragic but ordinary cases, someone young and vibrant, taken far too soon. But what lay beneath was far darker: secrets, lies, and a murder so brutal it stunned even hardened investigators. This is the story of Debora Sue Schatz, her final moments, the desperate search that followed, and the disturbing truth that finally surfaced. In 1980, Bismarck was the kind of city where people didn't lock their doors and where neighbors always waved at one another. Debora, known as Debbie to her friends, was well loved by those who knew her. She was devoted to her family, had a close circle of friends, and was known for her warmth and kindness. She had recently started settling into adulthood, finding her own independence, and was building the kind of steady, hopeful life young women often dreamed about in small-town America. But her innocence and her trust in the wrong people would tragically place her in unimaginable danger. On the evening of September 15, 1980, Debbie was last seen alive. That night, she had plans to meet someone she trusted, but when she didn't return home, her family immediately sensed something was wrong. Debbie wasn't the kind of person to just disappear. Her mother reported her missing. For investigators, missing adult cases often began with hesitation. But this felt different. Debbie's family insisted she wouldn't vanish without a word. Police began to search, but with few immediate leads. The first hours of the case slipped away. Then, only 2 days later, the horror revealed itself. Debbie's body was discovered in a field near Bismarck. She had been brutally murdered. The violence inflicted upon her was shocking, even for seasoned detectives. The crime scene offered few clear answers. Her remains showed signs of a violent attack. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The brutality suggested rage, but the lack of evidence left investigators baffled. Who could have wanted her dead, and why? In the small community, whispers spread quickly. Families looked at their neighbors differently. Friends asked themselves who among them was capable of such horror. As detectives knocked on doors, they learned that Debbie had been keeping company with a man who had a troubling past. That man was Charles Chuck O'Neill, a local who lived a life shadowed by criminal behavior and violence. He was older than Debbie, and though she had trusted him, his reputation was far from clean. To many, it was a mystery why she had been drawn into his orbit at all. Investigators soon learned that on the night she disappeared, Debbie had been with O'Neill. That detail alone shifted the case. But O'Neill denied involvement. He claimed he had dropped her off and had no idea what happened next. Yet inconsistencies began to unravel his story. Witnesses contradicted his account. His alibi wasn't airtight. And as police pressed harder, they began to see the outline of a sinister truth. It was revealed that O'Neill had lured Debbie under false pretenses. What should have been an ordinary meeting turned into her final night. Authorities suspected he had forced himself on her, then silenced her forever when she resisted. The community, once calm and trusting, now lived in fear. Parents kept their daughters close. The violence of the crime was unlike anything the area had experienced before. For Debbie's family, grief was immediate and crushing. She had been their joy, their light. To know that her life had been extinguished, with such cruelty left wounds that would never heal. O'Neill, meanwhile, tried to carry on with his life, but suspicion followed him everywhere. The police lacked sufficient physical evidence to convict him quickly. Still, they were determined not to let Debbie's murder go unsolved. For months, investigators pursued every lead. They spoke with O'Neill's acquaintances, tracing his movements, studying his past. What emerged was a portrait of a dangerous man, someone with violent tendencies, manipulative charm, and little regard for the lives of others. Finally, enough evidence was gathered to bring charges against him. In court, the details of Debbie's final moments horrified those who listened. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of betrayal and violence. Debbie had trusted O'Neill, and that trust had cost her life. He had lured her, assaulted her, and then murdered her in cold blood. The jury listened to the testimony, the forensic evidence, and the accounts of Debbie's last known movements. The trial was grueling for Debbie's family, forcing them to relive her final hours again and again. But they were determined to see justice served. O'Neill's defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, suggesting other possible suspects, but the mounting evidence pointed squarely at him. When the jury finally reached a verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Charles O'Neill was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Debbie's family, the conviction brought a measure of closure. But closure is not healing. Nothing could bring her back. Nothing could erase the violence she had endured. The years that followed, Debbie's story became a somber reminder of vulnerability, trust, and the dangers that can lurk behind familiar faces. Her life, though tragically cut short, continues to echo in the memories of those who loved her. The fields where her body was found no longer bear any visible scars, but for the community, the shadow of that crime has never entirely lifted. Her name remains spoken with sadness in Bismarck. Every anniversary of her death is a reminder of what was taken, not just from her family, but from the world. Debora Sue Schatz was only 23 years old when her life was stolen. She never had the chance to grow older, to fulfill her dreams, or to live the life she so deeply deserved. Her story endures as both a tragedy and a warning. Trust can be dangerous, and evil often hides behind the mask of the familiar. In remembering her, we honor not just the tragedy of her death, but the brightness of her life. The young woman who should have had decades ahead of her, but whose memory now demands that her story never be forgotten.